Chapter 3, Ways and Means, Part B. Our passions, emotions, and impulses to contribute a good deal in aggravating the troubles and at times cause a fierce tempest strong enough to threaten a complete wreck. We generally attribute its causes to circumstances, but it is a wrong notion. Mind is the center of this outer expansion of man in the form of the human body, and everything which is exhibited through the medium of the body proceeds from the center, the mind. If our mind comes to a harmonious state, circumstances and environments will have no effect on it, and there will be no disturbance within. Peace and tranquility shall reign all through under all circumstances. Passions, excitements, and desires will lose their intensity, and sorrow, joy, or misery will disappear from view. Our desires are the main cause of miseries. So, the only solution of miseries is the curtailment of desires. The fewer desires, the lesser shall be our miseries. But to become desireless is another problem. Desires from a network form a network in which we are entangled. The more we try to get rid of them, the tighter become the fibers of the net. The only way to free ourselves from the entanglements is to divert our attention from them and fix our eyes on the very real thing. If we cultivate a habit of remaining unmindful of them, they will soon begin to disappear from our view, and consequently our miseries will be minimized. Real, Reality alone will remain constantly before our eyes, and everything else will lose its charm or significance. Total absence of sufferings and miseries in life is, however, impossible and unnatural. In fact, they are rather meant for our betterment. They are just like bitter pills of medicine given to a patient to restore health. The misuse of even the best thing creates trouble. So is the case with miseries. Proper utility of everything at the proper time and in proper way is sure to bring forth good results in the long run. Miseries are really our best guide, which make our path smooth. To a man in the ordinary sphere of life, miseries are very helpful for his making. Referring to domestic troubles and miseries of a worldly life, my master used to say, "Our home is the training ground of patience and endurance." To endure calmly the adversities of a household life is for us the greatest penance, which is the noblest form of all other forms of penances. What we have therefore to do under the circumstances is not to give way to the feeling of anger or grief, but to assume an unquestioning attitude, thinking that we ourselves are in the wrong, for which we have to forbear with a cool mind. A solitary life in a forest and aloofness from all worldly concerns may be, to some, the means of cultivating patience and forbearance. But to us, the taunts and rebukes of our friends and relations is the greatest penance and the surest means of success. In fact, to pull up coolly with miseries and troubles, in fact, to put up coolly with miseries and troubles contributes much to our betterment. Hence, they are valuable assets to our progress. It is only by their wrong use that we spoil their effect and thus get deprived of their best advantages. Renunciation or non attachment is no doubt an essential stage in realization, and we can never be free from the entanglements of Maya unless we cultivate non attachment. But it does not mean severing our connection with home, family, and all our worldly concerns and taking up the life of a religious mendicant. I do not agree with those who hold the view that the only means of cultivating non attachment is to get away from home and family and retire to a solitary corner, discarding all worldly ties. Renunciation effected by such forced means is seldom found to be genuine, for it is just possible that, in spite of their apparent forced detachment from the world, they may still inwardly be clinging to it. No doubt, as a householder, we have to look after many things. We have to support our family. We have to provide for the education of our children. We have to look to their wants and necessities. We have to protect them from heat and cold, from trouble and sickness, and so on. For those necessities, we earn and possess money and property. The real evil is only our undue attachment with the things that we are associated with. This is the main cause of our sufferings. But if we are able to do everything in life thinking it to be our duty without any feeling of attraction or repulsion, we are in a way free from worldly ties and have renounced the world in true sense. Although we possess and make use of many things, everything we possess shall then seem to be a sacred trust from the Supreme Master for the discharge of the duties entrusted to us. Renunciation truly means non attachment with worldly objects and not the non possession of things. Thus, a household life in which possession of things and worldly ties are indispensable is no impediment in the way of renunciation and consequently of realization. Only if one is not unduly attached to the objects he is connected with. There are numerous examples of saints having attained the highest degree of perfection while leading a household life all through. Renunciation is, in fact, a condition or an inner state of mind which brings to our view the transitory and changing character of things and creates a feeling of non attachment with such objects. His eyes are fixed every moment on reality, which is unchanging and eternal, and he is free from the feelings of attraction and repulsion. This is Vairagya or renunciation in the true sense of the term. When we have achieved this state of mind, we are free from desires. We feel contented with what is available to us. The end of desires means the stopping of the formation of samskaras. What remains now is only to undergo the effect, that is, bhoga, of the previously formed samskaras, which are to be worked out during the course of our life. Nature too helps us in the work by creating field for bhoga in order to remove the impressions of our thoughts and actions from the causal body. When these coverings melt away, we begin to assume finer forms of existence. In order to control our thoughts and actions, we have to look to the proper working of the mind, which is never at rest even for a moment. I have often heard religious teachers railing at it in bitterest terms, ascribing all bad names to it and proclaiming it to be our worst enemy. The reason is quite plain. They think it to be the cause of all evil within us, and consequently they advise people to crush it and not to follow its biddings. But generally, people find it a hard task to restrain the diverse activities of the mind or to disregard its biddings. Their theoretical advice and lectures in this respect are therefore not of much avail to them, and almost none of these attending their lectures have ever been able to achieve the object in a practical way. Besides, the present circumstances and the environments too contribute much towards the ever increasing activities of the individual mind. Almost everyone today feels his life to be a hard struggle for existence, confronting acute problems of poverty, insecurity, distress, and rivalry, and it is almost impossible to keep himself free from its effects. The result is the constant unrest and disturbance of mind. We breathe in the same thing from the atmosphere and are consequently led away by circumstances and surroundings. Our individual mind has become the wreath rock, turning its face at every blast towards the direction in which the wind blows. The real hero in the struggle is one who braves them courageously and keeps himself free from their effect. I no doubt agree with those who say that every evil has its origin in the mind, which alone is therefore responsible for it. Though at the same time I may remind them that it is the very same mind that leads us to virtue and also helps us to realize our highest self. So it is not every evil alone that proceeds from the mind, but also every good. Hence, those who condemn it in the bitterest terms have no justification for it at all. It is really only due to the defective molding of the mind, and what is actually required is not the crushing or the killing of the mind, but merely its proper training. The mind is like the pendulum of a clock. The clock goes all right so long as the movement of the pendulum is regulated. If it is disturbed, the clock is out of order. Similarly, for this human clock, it is necessary that the movement of the mind be well regulated and adjusted. The methods to mold the mind and regulate its activities are also very simple. Really, we have spoiled the mind ourselves by allowing it to wander about aimlessly during leisure hours. The practice has continued for years and it has now become almost its second nature. If we now try to control the mind by putting it under restraint, we meet with little success. The more we try to suppress it by force, the more it rebounds and contracts, causing greater disturbance. The proper method to control the activities of the mind is to fix it on one sacred thought, just as we do in meditation, and dispel from it everything unwanted and superfluous. In course of time, after constant practice, the mind gets disciplined and regulated, and much of the inner disturbance is eliminated. The best course to free yourself from unwanted ideas is to treat them as uninvited guests and remain unmindful of them. They will then wither away like unwatered plants, and ultimately the same sacred thought will remain predominant. The only way to accomplish it is, therefore, meditation under the guidance of a capable master. By constant practice in meditation, the mind will become calm and peaceful, and the unwanted ideas will cease to trouble you. I often hear beginners complaining about the wandering of the mind during meditation. From the very first day, they expect that during their practice at meditation, the mind should remain at a standstill. But when they find different ideas and thoughts haunting their mind, they feel greatly perturbed. I must clear it to them that it is not the suspended condition of the mind we are striving for in our practice, but only the molding of its multifarious activities. We do not want to stop its normal working, but only bring it to a regulated and disciplined state. If the activities of the mind are stopped from the very beginning, we probably do not stand in need of practicing meditation at all. Meditation is the only process to achieve that end. Concentration is its natural result in due course. The proper method is to meditate all along, remaining quite unmindful of the foreign ideas and thoughts coming to our mind during that time. The mental struggle to keep off unwanted ideas often proves unsuccessful, for it causes a strong reaction which is often impossible for a man of ordinary capabilities to overcome, and which is sometimes likely to result in serious mental disturbance or even insanity. It may be possible for those leading a life of celibacy to have gained sufficient ojas, that is lustre, to cope successfully with the flow of thoughts and to withstand the effect of their reaction. But for the ordinary man, it is almost an impossibility. If instead of struggling to keep off ideas, we only remain unmindful of them, very soon they will lose their effect and cease troubling us. They will be then only like dogs barking after a caravan which goes forward without paying any heed to them. When we are attentive to ideas to check them, concentration is naturally there, which breeds power and thus they become stronger. A most common excuse advanced by certain people today is that they are too busy to devote any time to meditation or similar other practice. But the busiest man has the greatest leisure, is a well known saying. I think a man has more time at his disposal than there is work for him to do. Their complaint of the scarcity of time is due only to its wrong adjustment. If we utilize our time to the best advantage, we shall never have cause to complain that it is short or scarce. There are others who are a bit frank to admit that it is not for want of time that they remain away from the devotional duties, but for their habitual negligence and sluggishness which they cannot overcome. To them, I would say that they are probably never negligent or sluggish in their trade or profession, which they attend to with full zeal in spite of all personal inconvenience and even illness, only some because of some monetary gain or profit is in view. Their longing for material gain makes them unmindful of their inconvenience or illness. Similarly, if our longing for the realization of the goal is great, our negligent or sluggish habits will not stand in the way of our efforts or progress.